The rain battered the windshield of the old pickup truck. Each drop a hammer against Caleb's heart. He was 17. In the world, he'd known his father's stern voice, his mother's quiet prayers. The creak of their Iowa farmhouse felt like it was slipping away. Tonight, his dad had driven him 3 hours to this nowhere diner to meet a man who'd fix him. Caleb's hands trembled as he clutched the edge of his hoodie, the word fix echoing in his mind like a curse. He'd known he was gay since he was 12, when he'd caught himself staring too long at Jamie Carter in gym class, heart racing in a way that wasn't just friendship. Coming out to his parents last month had been a mistake. His father's face had turned to stone. His mother had wept. And now here he was, delivered to some stranger like a broken machine. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly as Caleb's dad, Tom, parked the truck. "This is for your own good," Tom said, his voice gruff, eyes fixed on the rain. "Pastor Mike says this guy's the best. He'll help you get right with God." Caleb wanted to scream, to tell his dad that he wasn't wrong, that loving someone wasn't a sin. But the words stayed lodged in his throat, heavy as the guilt his father had piled on him. Inside, the diner smelled of grease and coffee, the kind of place where truckers swapped stories and waitresses knew your order by heart. Caleb's eyes darted to a man in a corner, both mid-30s. Lean, with a scar above his left eyebrow and a Bible on the table. This had to be the fixer, Pastor Mike's friend, Ethan. His presence was magnetic, not in a comforting way, but like a storm you couldn't look away from. "Sit," Tom ordered, nudging Caleb toward the booth. Ethan looked up, his gaze sharp, assessing Caleb like a hunter sizing up prey. "You must be Caleb," he said, voice low and deliberate. "I hear you've got a problem." Caleb's stomach churned. He wanted to bolt, to run into the rain and never look back. But his father's hand on his shoulder kept him rooted. Ethan leaned forward, his fingers tracing the edge of his Bible. "I'm not here to judge you, son. I'm here to help you find your way back." His words were smooth, practiced, but there was something else in his eyes, something Caleb couldn't place. Was it pity? Or something darker? "Your dad's paid for a month. You'll stay with me. We'll work through this. You'll come out stronger." Caleb's heart sank. A month. He glanced at his dad, hoping for a flicker of doubt. But Tom's face was unyielding. "You'll thank me one day," Tom said, standing to leave. Listen to Ethan. He knows what's best. The bell above the diner door jingled as Tom walked out, leaving Caleb alone with a man who was supposed to erase who he was. Ethan slid a cup of coffee toward Caleb. "Relax. We're just talking tonight." But Caleb didn't relax. He couldn't. Every word felt like a trap. Every glance from Ethan a test. The diner's hum faded as Ethan began asking questions about Caleb's feelings, his urges, his faith. Each answer Caleb gave felt like a betrayal of himself. But he didn't know how to fight back. Not yet. As the night wore on, Ethan's tone softened, but his questions grew sharper, probing deeper into Caleb's heart. "When did you first feel wrong?" Ethan asked, and Caleb flinched. He wanted to say he never felt wrong, that the only wrong thing was being here, being forced to change. But fear kept him silent. He thought of Jamie Carter again. The way his laugh had made Caleb's world brighter, and he clung to that memory like a lifeline. By the time they left the diner, the rain had stopped, but Caleb felt like he was drowning. Ethan drove him to a small cabin on the edge of town, a place that smelled of pine and dust. "This is home for now," Ethan said, tossing Caleb a blanket. "We start tomorrow." Caleb lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd ever find a way out or if he'd lose himself completely. The cabin's walls seemed to close in on Caleb as dawn broke, painting the room in a cold, gray light. He hadn't slept, his mind replaying the diner, Ethan's piercing gaze, and his father's retreating figure. He was trapped here, in a place that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary, with a man who believed Caleb's heart was something to be carved out and reshaped. Ethan was already up, brewing coffee in the cramped kitchen. "Morning," he said, his tone almost casual. But Caleb caught the edge and Ida a reminder that this wasn't a friendly visit. "We've got work to do. You ready to face yourself?" Caleb wanted to snap that he'd faced himself years ago, that he knew who he was. Instead, he nodded, his throat tight, knowing defiance wouldn't help him here. The first day was a blur of Ethan's program. It started with prayer, Ethan's voice booming through the cabin as he asked God to cleanse Caleb's soul. Then came the lectures hours of Ethan quoting scripture, telling stories of healed men who'd left their sinful desires behind. Caleb sat through it, his jaw clenched, trying to block out the words that felt like knives. He thought of Jamie, of the time they'd snuck into the school gym after hours, laughing as they shot hoops, their shoulders brushing. That memory was his anchor, the one thing Ethan couldn't touch. By afternoon, Ethan shifted tactics. He handed Caleb a journal. "Write down every time you felt tempted," he said, his eyes locking onto Caleb's. "Be honest. God sees everything." Caleb stared at the blank pages, his hand shaking. He didn't want to write about Jamie, about the warmth in his chest when their eyes met. That was his, not Ethan's to dissect. So he wrote lies vague, safe words about distractions and struggles. Ethan read them later, nodding like he'd won something. The days blurred into a routine of prayer, lectures, and writing. Ethan was relentless, always watching, always pushing. But there were moments fleeting, confusing moments when Caleb thought he saw something else in Ethan. A hesitation when he spoke about sin, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Once, when Caleb accidentally knocked over a glass, Ethan's hand shot out to steady him, and the touch lingered a second too long. Caleb pulled away, heart pounding, unsure if he'd imagined it. On the fifth day, Ethan took Caleb into town for exposure therapy. They sat in a coffee shop, and Ethan pointed out men walking by, asking Caleb if he felt anything. It was humiliating, like being stripped bare in public. Caleb wanted to scream that he wasn't some lab rat, that his feelings weren't a disease. But he kept his head down, muttering, "No," each time, even when his heart ached for something real, something like what he'd felt with Jamie. That night, back at the cabin, Ethan seemed different, quieter, almost unsettled. "You're fighting this harder than most," he said, his voice low. "Why?" Caleb froze. For the first time, he felt like Ethan was asking a real question, not just setting a trap. "Because I don't think I'm wrong," Caleb said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Ethan's face darkened, but he didn't respond. He just turned away, leaving Caleb alone with his defiance, a spark that felt both dangerous and alive. As the first week ended, Caleb found a small rebellion. In the journal, he started writing truths, hidden in metaphors only he understood, about a boy who felt like sunlight, about a world that tried to dim him. Ethan didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't say. Caleb held onto those pages like a secret weapon, a reminder that he was still himself, no matter what Ethan tried to do. Caleb's rebellion grew in the quiet moments, like weeds pushing through cracks in concrete. The cabin, with its creaking floors and Ethan's ever-present Bible, felt less like a cage each time Caleb wrote in his journal. He poured his heart into those pages, memories of Jamie, dreams of a life where he could love without fear. But the weight of Ethan's program was relentless, and Caleb's strength wavered under it. Ethan's sessions grew more intense. He started showing Caleb videos, grainy testimonies of men who claimed they'd been cured. Their voices hollow, their eyes distant. "This could be you," Ethan said, his tone almost pleading. Caleb wanted to laugh, to call it all a lie. But the fear in those men's faces haunted him. What if Ethan broke him, too? What if he lost the part of himself that felt alive when he thought of Jamie? One afternoon, Ethan took Caleb to a church on the outskirts of town, a squat building with peeling paint. Inside, a group of men sat in a circle, their heads bowed as a pastor preached about overcoming temptation. Caleb was forced to join them, to share his progress. He lied through his teeth, saying he was trying, that he wanted to change. The other men nodded, their faces a mix of pity and judgment. But Caleb felt like a fraud. He caught Ethan watching him, his expression unreadable. And for a moment, Caleb wondered if Ethan believed the lies any more than he did. That night, something shifted. Ethan didn't pray or lecture. Instead, he sat across from Caleb at the kitchen table, a beer in his hand, something Caleb hadn't seen before. "You ever think about what you're giving up?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than usual. Caleb blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Ethan leaned back, his scar catching the light. "Family. Community. A normal life. You really want to throw that away for this?" Caleb's chest tightened. He wanted to say that love wasn't something you threw away, that it was worth everything. But Ethan's eyes held something new: pain. Maybe. Or regret, and Caleb couldn't find the words. The next day, Ethan took Caleb on a hike through the woods behind the cabin. The air was crisp, the trees a riot of autumn red and gold. Ethan talked about his own life for the first time, how he'd grown up in a town like Caleb's, how he'd fought his own demons. "I wasn't always like this," he said, kicking a stone down the path. "I used to be lost, too." Caleb's heart raced. Was Ethan admitting something? Or was this another trick to get inside his head? As they walked, Caleb noticed Ethan's guard slipping. He laughed at a squirrel darting up a tree, his face softer, almost human. For a moment, Caleb saw the man behind the mission, someone who might have once been like him. But when Caleb asked, "What changed for you?" Ethan's face closed off. "God," he said curtly, and the moment was gone. Back at the cabin, Caleb wrote in his journal about the hike, about the flicker of something real in Ethan. He didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a crack in the wall Ethan had built between them. For the first time, Caleb wondered if he could reach Ethan, if he could make him see that love wasn't a sin. It was a dangerous hope, but it burned brighter than anything else in that cold, lonely cabin. The second week brought a new kind of tension. Caleb's small acts of defiance, his secret journal entries, his refusal to break under Ethan's pressure gave him strength. But they also made him reckless. He started pushing back, small at first, like refusing to pray aloud during Ethan's morning sessions. Ethan noticed, his jaw tightening. But he didn't punish Caleb. Instead, he doubled down, filling their days with more videos, more scripture, more questions designed to make Caleb doubt himself. One night, after a particularly grueling session, Caleb snapped. Ethan had asked him to describe his worst temptation, and Caleb couldn't take it anymore. "It's not temptation," he said, his voice shaking. "It's love. I love someone, and you can't make that go away." Ethan froze, his hand hovering over his Bible. For a second, Caleb thought he saw something break in Ethan's eyes. But then the mask was back. "You're confused," Ethan said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. The next day, Ethan took Caleb to a community center for a support group meeting. It was worse than the churchmen and women sharing stories of their struggle, their voices heavy with shame. Caleb felt like he was suffocating, surrounded by people who saw his heart as a battleground. But then he saw him, Jamie Carter, sitting across the room, his face pale, his eyes locked on Caleb's. Caleb's breath caught. Jamie wasn't supposed to be here. He lived 3 hours away, in Caleb's hometown. Had his parents sent him, too? The meeting dragged on, but Caleb barely heard it. His focus on Jamie, on the way his hands fidgeted, the way he avoided Caleb's gaze. When the meeting ended, Caleb cornered him outside, heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. Jamie's eyes were red, his voice barely audible. "My dad found out about us. He sent me to some program nearby, but they brought me here today." Caleb's world tilted. Us. The word felt like a lifeline and a wound. They'd never said it out loud, never defined what they were. But now, standing in the parking lot, Caleb wanted to reach for Jamie, to hold him and promise they'd get through this. But Jamie stepped back, fear in his eyes. "I can't," he said, and walked away. That night, Caleb couldn't write in his journal. The pain was too raw, too real. He lay awake, replaying Jamie's face, the distance between them. Ethan noticed his silence the next day, but didn't push. Instead, he took Caleb to a lake near the cabin, a quiet place where the water mirrored the sky. "Sometimes," Ethan said, skipping a stone across the surface, "you have to let go of what's hurting you." Caleb wanted to scream that Jamie wasn't hurting him, that this Ethan, the program, the shame was the real pain. But as they sat by the lake, Ethan's voice softened again. "I had someone. Once," he said, almost to himself. "Didn't work out. I chose a different path." Caleb's heart stopped. Was Ethan admitting he'd been in love with a man? The revelation hung between them, fragile and dangerous, and Caleb didn't know whether to push or pull away. For the first time, he saw Ethan not as a fixer, but as a man who might be just as broken as he was. Caleb's world felt split in two: Jamie's rejection in the parking lot and Ethan's cryptic confession by the lake. He didn't know which hurt more, or which gave him hope. The cabin, once a prison, now felt like a battleground where Caleb fought to hold on to himself, to understand Ethan, to find a way back to Jamie. Ethan's sessions grew erratic. Some days, he was the same rigid fixer, quoting scripture and pushing Caleb to repent. Others, he was quieter, almost distant, like he was wrestling with something he couldn't name. Caleb started to see the cracks in Ethan's armor, moments when he'd pause mid-sentence, his eyes far away, or when he'd linger too long watching Caleb write in his journal. It was confusing, maddening, and it made Caleb bold. One evening, after a tense session, Caleb confronted him. "You said you had someone," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "What did you mean?" Ethan's face hardened, but Caleb pressed on. "You're trying to fix me. But what if you're the one who's broken?" The words hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. Ethan stood, his chair scraping the floor. And for a moment, Caleb thought he'd lash out. But Ethan just walked outside, leaving Caleb alone with the echo of his own courage. The next day, Ethan took Caleb back to the community center. Jamie was there again. And this time, their eyes met across the room, a silent apology passing between them. After the meeting, Caleb found Jamie by the vending machines, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I'm sorry," Jamie whispered. "I was scared. I still am." Caleb's heart ached, but he reached out, brushing Jamie's arm. "Me too," he said, "but I'm not giving up on us." Their moment was cut short when Ethan appeared, his expression unreadable. He didn't mention Jamie, but the ride back to the cabin was silent, the air thick with unspoken questions. That night, Ethan didn't pray or lecture. He just sat by the fire, staring into the flames. "You're different," he said finally. "Most kids break by now." Caleb didn't know if it was a compliment or a warning, but it felt like a victory. Caleb's journal became his lifeline, filled with letters to Jamie he'd never sent, dreams of a future where they could be together. But he also wrote about Ethan, about the man behind the mission, the one who seemed to carry his own secrets. Caleb started to wonder if he could reach Ethan, if he could make him see that love wasn't something to be fixed. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. As the third week began, Caleb felt a shift. Ethan started sharing more small stories about his childhood, his strict father, the church that shaped him. Each story felt like a piece of a puzzle, a glimpse into why Ethan was here, trying to save kids like Caleb. And Caleb, against all odds, started to feel something for Ethan, not love, but a strange kind of empathy. He wondered if Ethan was fighting his own heart, just as Caleb was fighting to keep his. The cabin's isolation was suffocating, but Caleb found ways to breathe. His moments with Jamie at the community center, brief as they were, fueled him. They'd steal glances, brush hands, whisper promises to find a way out. But Ethan was always there, watching, his presence a reminder that Caleb's time was running out. The month was nearly over, and he didn't know what would happen when it ended. Would his dad take him home, still expecting a fixed son? Or would Ethan break him first? Ethan's behavior grew more unpredictable. One day, he'd be cold, drilling Caleb with questions about his progress. The next, he'd share a story about his past, like the time he ran away from home at 16, only to return because he had nowhere else to go. "I thought I could escape," Ethan said, his voice low. "But you can't outrun who you are." Caleb's heart raced. Was Ethan talking about himself, or warning Caleb? The line between them blurred, and Caleb felt a dangerous pull toward understanding him. One night, after a tense session, Caleb found Ethan outside, staring at the stars. "Why do you do this?" Caleb asked, his voice soft but firm. "Why do you try to fix people?" Ethan didn't answer at first, his breath visible in the cold air. "Because someone has to," he said finally. "Because I know what it's like to be lost." Caleb wanted to push, to ask what Ethan had lost, but the weight of the moment stopped him. Instead, he said, "I'm not lost. I'm just me." The next day, Ethan took Caleb to the lake again. They sat in silence, the water still, the air heavy. "You remind me of him," Ethan said suddenly, his voice barely audible. "The one I lost." Caleb's breath caught. Ethan's words were a confession, a crack in the wall he'd built. Before Caleb could respond, Ethan stood, his face tight, Forget I said that, he muttered, and walked away. Caleb's journal overflowed with questions. Who was Ethan's him? Why had he chosen this life? This mission to change others? Caleb started to see Ethan not as a villain, but as a man trapped by his own past, fighting a war he didn't believe in. It made Caleb bolder. He stopped lying in his sessions, speaking openly about his feelings for Jamie, about the love that made him feel alive. Ethan didn't stop him, but his silence spoke volumes. At the community center, Caleb and Jamie grew braver. They passed notes, hidden in books or under tables, planning their escape. Jamie's program was stricter, but he'd overheard the staff talking about a bus station nearby. We could run, Jamie whispered one day, his eyes bright with fear and hope. Caleb nodded, his heart pounding. They'd need money, a plan, a way to disappear before their parents or Ethan could stop them. As the third week ended, Caleb felt the clock ticking. He didn't know if he could trust Ethan, if the man's confessions were a trap or a lifeline. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let anyone, not his dad, not Ethan, not the world, take away who he was. He'd fight for Jamie, for himself, for the life he deserved. And maybe, just maybe, he could help Ethan find his way, too. The final days in the cabin were a tightrope walk. Caleb's defiance was no longer hidden, spoke openly about Jamie, about love, about refusing to be fixed. Ethan's reaction swung between anger and silence, but he never stopped Caleb. It was as if Ethan was unraveling, his mission crumbling under the weight of Caleb's truth. Caleb saw it in the way Ethan's hands shook when he held his Bible, the way his eyes lingered on Caleb's journal. One night, Caleb found a photo tucked in Ethan's bibline old Polaroid of two young men, laughing, arms around each other. One was unmistakably Ethan, younger, softer, his scar not yet there. The other was a stranger, but the way they looked at each other told Caleb everything. He confronted Ethan the next morning, holding up the photo. "This is him, isn't it?" he asked. "The one you lost." Ethan's face went pale, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Caleb pushed. "You loved him, and you're punishing yourself for it. That's why you're here, isn't it?" Ethan's eyes blazed, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he told Caleb the story. His name was David, his first love, lost to a car accident after they'd fought about coming out. Ethan had blamed himself, turned to the church, let them convince him his love was a sin. "I thought I could save others," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I thought I could save myself." Caleb's heart ached for Ethan, but it didn't change his resolve. He and Jamie had a plan. They'd saved enough change from vending machines and Ethan's loose cash to buy bus tickets. They'd leave the night before Caleb's dad was due to pick him up, heading for a city where they could start over. Caleb didn't tell Ethan, but he left a note in his journal, hidden in the pages. "You don't have to live like this. You're not broken either." The night of the escape, Caleb's heart pounded as he slipped out of the cabin, meeting Jamie at the edge of town. The bus station was a mile away, the air cold and sharp. They held hands as they ran, fear and hope tangled together. But when they reached the station, Ethan was there, waiting in the shadows. Caleb's stomach dropped. Had he betrayed them? "I saw your note," Ethan said, his voice steady but soft. "I'm not here to stop you." He handed Caleb an envelope, cash, more than enough for tickets and a fresh start. "I can't change what I've done," Ethan said, his eyes wet. "But I can do this." Caleb didn't know what to say. his throat tight with gratitude and grief. He hugged Ethan. A brief, fierce embrace, then took Jamie's hand and boarded the bus. As the bus pulled away, Caleb looked back at Ethan, standing alone under the streetlight. He didn't know if Ethan would ever find peace, but he'd given Caleb a chance at it. The road stretched ahead, unknown and terrifying, but with Jamie beside him, Caleb felt ready to face it. The bus rumbled through the night, carrying Caleb and Jamie toward a city they'd only seen in movies. They sat close, their hands intertwined, the weight of their escape settling over them like a blanket. Caleb's mind raced his dad, his mom, the life he was leaving behind, but with Jamie's warmth beside him, he felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new. The city was overwhelming, a chaos of lights and noise. They found a cheap motel, using Ethan's money to rent a room for the week. Caleb called his mom from a payphone, his voice shaking as he told her he was safe but not coming home. "I love you," he said, "but I can't be what Dad wants." She cried, begged him to reconsider. But Caleb hung up, his heart heavy but resolute. He didn't know if his family would ever understand, but he knew he couldn't go back. Days turned into weeks. Caleb and Jamie found jobs dishwashing, stocking shelves scraping by butt together. They rented a tiny apartment, a place with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. But it was theirs. They laughed, fought, loved, learning what it meant to be themselves in a world that didn't always want them. Caleb thought of Ethan often, wondering if he'd found a way to heal, to forgive himself. He hoped so. One night, Caleb got a letter, forwarded from the motel. It was from his dad, Tom. The words were stiff, formal, but they cut deep. "I thought I was saving you. I was wrong. I don't understand you, but I want to try." Caleb cried as he read it, Jamie holding him tight. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start, a crack in the wall that had broken their family. Caleb wrote back, a long letter about his life, his love for Jamie, his hope for the future. He didn't know if his dad would read it, if it would change anything, but it felt like planting a seed. He thought of Ethan's photo, of David, of the love that had shaped and shattered so many lives. Love wasn't a sin, it was a force, unstoppable, even when it hurt. Years later, Caleb and Jamie stood in a small park, exchanging vows in front of a handful of friends. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. Caleb thought of the diner, the cabin, the bus station moments that had tested him, shaped him, led him here. He looked at Jamie, his eyes bright with tears, and knew they'd fought for this, for a love that refused to be fixed. Their family was new, built from choice, not blood. Caleb's mom came to the wedding, her smile tentative but real. His dad didn't, but he sent a card, a small step toward healing. As Caleb and Jamie danced under the stars, Caleb felt a weight lift. The world hadn't changed, but they had. They'd found their place in it, not by hiding, but by being exactly who they were. And somewhere, Caleb hoped, Ethan was finding his own way, to a way to live without shame, to love without fear. Because in the end, love was the only thing that could break a family and the only thing that could mend it.